All right, everyone. Welcome back to the final session of Cryptoeconomic Systems. We're going to have a hard finish at 5:30, so we've got a bit of time for our three speakers. This last session is on what we're calling what was it called? Cryptographic economics. So the theme that's tying these three things together is really to look at a lot of sort of interesting economic models that are sitting underneath ideas. So the first one is we're going to look at some game theory applications that cut between economics and security. Then we're going to look at a model of Uniswap. And then the final session will be on shell and game models. So again, back into game theory. So our first speaker is Sarah Azouvi from UCL, and take it away, Sarah. Sarah,
Okay.
you can start. Thank you.
Ready? Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. So I'm Sarah. I'm a researcher at Protocol Labs, and today I'm going to present our paper with Alexander Hicks called Tools for Game Theoretic Models of Security for Cryptocurrencies. Okay, so let me start by doing a very quick, recap on blockchains, and here particularly I'll be talking about Bitcoin and the fact that the security of Bitcoin relies very, very heavily on an economic argument. And especially it relies on the fact that it costs a lot of money to create blocks. So the fact that it costs money to create blocks helps defense against Sybil attacks. Also, it helps incentivize consensus. That's also what makes it possible to have a fully decentralized cryptocurrency, which I guess is directly related to the fact that it helps defense against Sybil attacks. And also due to that, more, the fact that, we want to incentivize people to join the protocol means that we can have more participation. And if we have more participation in the protocol, then the protocol is more secure. So yeah, this is very, quickly to emphasize the fact that really the whole security of Bitcoin really relies on this economic argument. Okay, so now, us, researcher, how do we go about proving blockchain security? Because if we think about traditional distributed system or cryptography, they do not at all incorporate incentives. So, how can we really capture this fact that the security is really linked to an economic argument? So on the other hand, we have the field of game theory, which is exactly focused on incentives. But on the other hand, it does not, consider any security notions. So, a question that I think most of the researchers, are researching today in this space is can we mix game theory and security in order to have a model that really capture blockchain security? So thankfully for us, the field of game theory combined with security has been studied a lot in the past. And also it has been studied before Bitcoin. So what my co-author and I did is that we reviewed a lot of papers that were exactly trying to combine game theory and security. And, we try to write them up and especially emphasize some concepts that I think and we hope will be useful to our community. So a quick disclaimer here, both this talk and our paper is non-exhaustive. So we haven't reviewed, we don't talk about all the paper that deal with game theory and security. I don't think that would be possible. We only, as I said, highlight some interesting concepts, and especially in this talk, because it's quite short, I will, be mentioning even less paper. So please do refer to the paper for a longer list, but still it's still non-exhaustive. So that was my discussion. Okay, so first, why mix game theory and security? So I've already said before that in Bitcoin it's quite obvious that security is super linked to game theory aspect. But what about other before Bitcoin, why people were even doing that? So security economics tells us that security is about more than technical construction. So we actually have a paper called Incentives in Security Protocol, also with my co-author Alex, as well as Stephen Murdoch, that explain that very well. But just to mention one quick example, if we think about like banking system, for example, chip and pin that we use in Europe, I guess less in the USA, like cryptographically, they are secure, that's fine. But there is actually a lot of like fraud and problem that I've came up with this protocol, just due to actually like deliberate decision from participants. And this was due to like misaligned incentive. Like people, were not taking the steps that they were supposed to in order to have full security. And again, if researcher had, incorporated like this before in their analysis, like maybe we wouldn't have had this like misaligned incentive that resulted in like actual failure. So additionally, game theory, and more specifically, the field of mechanism design serves to promote good outcomes. So again, we see that this is very similar to security, where we want to create protocols that we cannot attack, so that also promotes good outcome. So now I'm going to do a quick recap on game theory and mechanism design. This is an interdisciplinary conference, so that's going to be very basic, and I'm assuming that most of the people are already familiar with this concept, so it's going to be quite quick and quite high level. Okay, so yeah, what is game theory? So, in game theory, we have players, they have a set of actions, and out of this action, these actions lead to like some outcome, and each outcome is associated with like a utility function. So again, like the basic example of game theory is like the prisoner dilemma, where players can cooperate and defect, and whatever action they choose and the other player choose, this will result in an outcome, longer or shorter sentence, and this is associated with some utility. So game theory is really about studying what is the best strategy that players are going to do in order to maximize their utility. So in order to do that, game theory uses like solution concept, and the most famous of them is the Nash equilibrium. So in a Nash equilibrium, assuming that every player, play like that strategy, then no player can unilaterally gain anything by deviating from the strategy. So again, I hope that was clear, and probably you are all familiar with this. So now Nash equilibrium, they do have some limitations. So first, they do not consider like coalitions of players. Second, they do not consider irrational player. We are only dealing with rational player, for which we know like their utility. So in the same way, they don't deal with like arbitrary faults, for example, as we do in distributed systems. Also, like it's hard to like incorporate like external incentives. Usually, like we really like defines the utility function and the incentive like within that like specific game. And also another problem is that computing a Nash equilibrium is actually most of the time like not a tractable problem. So computing it is actually hard. Another like limitation is that usually in game theory, we assume that we have some kind of authority that is here to enforce the payoff and like enforce the game, basically. So that's also something that, for example, we don't have when we work about distributed system or cryptography. So now what about mechanism design? So mechanism design is a subfield of game theory, and a lot of people refer to it as reverse game theory. So it means that in mechanism design, we start from a desired outcome, and then we design a game such that if players are rational, then their action are going to lead them to our desired outcome. Okay, so however, that is quite hard to do in practice. So here, I'm going to mention a quick example that we talk about in our paper. Actually, both of our paper is like the Israeli nursery study. So what happened is in a nursery, they had a trouble with parents coming too late to pick up their children from the nursery. So, exactly like mechanism design, what they decided to do is they decided to put fines so that, parents that were late will just be fine. However, what happened is like the parents that were late, they interpreted this fine as a way to pay for extra childcare. And so in the end, they didn't come earlier, and actually they came even later, because now, you know, they kind of like they feel like it was like justified that they were just like paying for extra childcare, so they could just like come later. So that was exactly like the opposite effect. And the thing is like, so after that they decided to remove the fine, because obviously like that didn't work out. But the problem is like the behavior of the parents, it didn't go back to the way it was before. So parents were still picking their children like even later. So that's just a story like to emphasize how hard it is to actually like get our incentives right. So after this anecdote, let's do a very quick recap on security. So on security, unlike game theory, we don't deal with rational players. What we deal with is like fully malicious adversary and you know, honest player. So it's kind of like good versus bad players. So that's very different from what we had before. And you know, I think like the aim of security, very loosely, is to design you know, a protocol such as like things work. So if we think about distributed system, like what that would mean is that would mean, you know, safety and liveness. In cryptography, again, we'll have like maybe like different definition, but that's very, you know, loosely what we want. And another requirement that, again, here would be different from like game theory is that we don't want any like trusted third party. We want like party to be able to do the protocol by themselves. Otherwise, you know, maybe that would be very easy to do security. Okay, so now that I've done this like quick recap on like the main difference between game theory and security, why is combining security and game theory is hard? So as I said, it's because we are mixing different frameworks. So it requires additional skills. The complexity is like obviously increased, and we have different assumptions. So here I'm going to emphasize again what I've just said, because it's very important. When we talk about security, we consider good versus bad player. When we talk about game theory, we consider rational players. And when we talk about game theory, like we usually have like some way to like enforce the payoff and enforce the rule of the game, which obviously we don't want when we do security. Okay, so now that hopefully I have, you know, like motivated this work enough, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce like some concepts that have been presented in the literature that do exactly this, like try to like mix this these two fields. So first, I'll be talking about the field of consensus. So one model that was presented is called the bar model. It was presented by Jean-Philippe Martin and his co-author. So here, what it does, you know, on a high level is actually quite simple, is that it considers both Byzantine players, so fully malicious players, then altruistic players, so good players, and rational players. So if you recognize that's, you know, exactly like the whole type, you know, of player that we can have both in game theory and in like distributed system or game theory. So like that's exactly, you know, like they're exactly like mixing everything. So that's very interesting. And especially in their paper, what they do is, you know, they have some protocols that are resilient, not just, again, like Byzantine player, but also, again, rational players. So this like ideas is also refined a bit more by the concept of robustness. So if you remember at the beginning of the talk, when I was talking about Nash equilibrium, I was telling you that one of the limitations of Nash equilibriums is that they don't consider coalitions, which I think is clear that are very important when we do a decentralized system. And also they don't consider irrational players. So that's exactly what robustness is about. Robustness is about doing an extension of Nash equilibrium that considers both coalitions and also irrational players. So this concept was introduced by Itai Abraham and his co-author, and so that's also a very, very interesting like extension and very interesting concepts. Okay, so now I'll be moving to the field of cryptography. So, like similar as the field of distributed system, like cryptographers, even before Bitcoin, they have been interested in mixing game theory and cryptography. And this has led to the subfield of rational cryptography that does exactly this. So here again, I'm gonna very quickly explain one framework that have been proposed in this subfield of rational cryptography that is called rational protocol design. So rational protocol design, it's actually a very nice idea of like incorporating game theory with cryptography, because what it does is that it considers some kind of like meta games between, on one side, the protocol designer, and on the other side, the adversary. So hopefully you can still hear me. Yes, I'll keep going. So so what's interesting in that framework is like we don't consider just a game played between like the players of like a distributed system, but like really like the protocol designer and like an adversary. So how it goes, the protocol designer will send its protocol to the adversary. So the protocol that is to be followed by good players. And in the next step of the game, the adversary will reply with an attack on the protocol. So like you can think of it as like an algorithm, a polynomial time algorithm that attacks the protocol. So one key difference here, one thing like to notice is that we don't consider actually a fully malicious adversary as we usually do in cryptography, but instead we consider a rational attacker. And so that's actually quite interesting because, this allows the protocol to actually have some vulnerabilities. But what it means, like in that case, a protocol will be secure if this rational adversary cannot gain anything by attacking the protocol. So even if the protocol has some flaws, if exploiting, this vulnerability doesn't, result in a gain for the adversary, then the protocol will be secure. So that's nice because then we can actually bypass some impossibility results and some, protocol that we would not be able to prove secure in like some other model here could actually be proven secure. So on the other hand, the problem with this is that we consider like a rational adversary, and we don't consider like a fully malicious adversary. So it's not like as complete, for example, as the bar model, but still very interesting. So now let me go back to the field of blockchains, because it's like this paper were not actually like directly related to blockchains. So if we talk about consensus, so the bar model, robustness, and even like rational protocol design that I've mentioned in my talk, they have all been applied in the context of blockchain. So that's actually nice to see. But on the other hand, there is still like no model that has been like widely adapted by the community. And we still see that a lot of like blockchain consensus paper, either they will not consider like incentives at all, they would just like do like classic bad versus good player model, or maybe they will consider some incentive, but then they will do like some basic like Nash equilibria, and they will not do some more advanced concept like robustness. So I think so yeah, unfortunately, nothing widely adapted, but still like nice research being done and being adapted, applied. So now there is also like another aspect, to blockchain, again, that I think I've mentioned at the beginning, is like this decentralization aspect. So also it's really nice that we see some empirical work that is done, on pools, like people are measuring how many like participants we have in the network, and like show that well, actually like blockchain are not as decentralized as we would like them to be. There's also now some theoretical paper that are coming about like decentralization, but same, for consensus, we still don't have like adopted model of like, what decentralization mean, and like how we can like really like people don't measure it like theoretically. So there are still maybe like that's a nice avenue for future work for us researchers. Okay, now I'm gonna finish my talk with, mentioning like more open problems that I think will reflect maybe on what I've said during the talk. So first, utilities are hard to compute in practice. They are hard to, get right. So that's, one thing also why, like it's important to like keep this aspect of bad, like fully bad player and not like rational player. Is like we cannot always know what the utilities of the player are. There are a lot of external incentives that we don't always know how to model. Also, like most of the research is theoretical, even though I have mentioned like there's some like empirical research on like pools. But if we think more about consensus, like most of the research is theoretical. And it would be nice to have actually like empirical data, because we know that in economy, it's kind of like a problem that sometimes, like economists will come up with some model that actually don't match the like real behavior that is observed, which make like this model completely useless. So it's nice that we have this like nice theoretical work about bar model, but now it would be nice to actually see, that this model are useful and that they fit the reality. So it would be very interesting to have, more empirical data. Like especially something to notice is like there have been like recently a lot of attacks on incentive. For example, you could think about like selfish mining. And a lot of people are actually like talking about the fact that, well, this attack, they are not being observed in practice. And one of the reasons could be this kind of like short-term versus long-term profit dilemma. And the fact that, like maybe a miner could like attack the incentives of a cryptocurrency and increase the profit on a short-term basis. But then like if this induces a loss of confidence in the cryptocurrency, like maybe this will impact this like long-term profit. So that's also, that also goes back to the fact that it's hard to compute like utilities in practice. But so it would be nice to have some empirical and like more study on this. So thank you for your time. And I think if I can hear you, I'm happy to take some questions.
Great, thank you, Sarah. I thoroughly recommend this paper as it's a fantastic example of a survey paper that's covering two sort of very separate areas of essentially how humans make decisions in game theory and then how machines make decisions in security analysis. And these two fields have sort of evolved quite separately for decades. And finally, they're coming together in a really interesting way. And I think so there's a lot of interesting opportunities to sort of see how to leverage off each other. I was going to take the chair's prerogative and ask a question, Sarah, directly of you. What opportunities do you think that we're actually dealing with a new science here, a new sort of hybrid human-machine decision-making science, or whether these fields are going to carry on separate trajectories?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough question, because also I think like one of the things with like our paper is like also to show that actually like even like before Bitcoin, like people have already been trying to like mix these two fields, and like maybe you could argue that it's been like unsuccessful because, as I said, like no real model has been adopted. So so it's kind of like hard to know how this will like evolve like in the future. So I'm hoping that maybe like again if we are more aware of like this field of research that has been done, like maybe this will like help us like not reinvent the wheel and not like reinvent like the same concept, and have like some kind of like new field where people actually agree on like what model to use, and not every paper is like coming like with a new model that is the same but different than like other papers. Does that answer your question? Or yeah,
fantastic. Wasim.
Hello. Oh, hi, Sarah. It's Wasim. So you had a slide talking about, inverted commas, rational crypto, and it reminded me of this recent article by Brian Ford and Rainer Burmer, Rationality is Self-Defeating in Permissionless Systems. I was wondering if you've read that, and if you have any thoughts with relation to this particular section of your talk.
Yeah, absolutely. I've read it. I think it was very interesting. And actually, I think that this, that's what I was saying at the end of the slide, is like, I think that's definitely a flaw in this paper, that they consider like a rational adversary. Like on the one hand, like they have really nice ideas, and maybe like in some setting that could be useful. But like I agree that like we cannot only consider a rational adversary. So I completely agree with like Brian and Rainer's paper that you know, a system is like, you know, only like a subsystem into like a bigger system. And as I said, like we cannot consider like external like incentives. So I completely agree that I think it's important to like consider rationality when we design protocol, but we have to like keep this like fully malicious, irrational adversary. So yeah, I think this paper is interesting, and I agree with that fact.
Do we have any other questions from the floor? All right. Thank you very much, Sarah. That was absolutely a fantastic overview of how security and game theory comes together. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.